Hey, cat people, people that are interested in cats, the paranormal, and other things. Just try to put this top down, it's been a numpty. So, obviously, I haven't got any videos properly at the moment, just stories out of books, which I've got loads of. It's just finding something that's not, I don't know, too much to read about. I mean, I could read books about certain ghosts, not ghosts as in ones that go at certain places, telling you what types of ghosts there is, where the word comes from. It's just, this one just gives you a definition of things like, hang on, let me just read it out, the contents. I could take my glasses off. We have things like cults of the dead, sacred spirits, spirits in the scriptures, ancient apparitions, restless spirits, Wellington Mill, the Fox Sisters. Actually, that's quite a very, very old story, the Fox Sisters. The birth of spiritualism. That's where the Fox Sisters came from, because they were well known to do spiritualism, but they faked a lot of it. So I do know a bit about that. Surplus of spirits, the haunting of Charles Dickens, ghost lights, the ghost club, a ghostly intruder, concern from beyond the grave. So there's loads and loads of stories that are in here. So it's whether people want to know the technical side of ghosts, and you know how things like, you know, the stone tape theory, if people want to know that. I mean, I'm sure there's quite a lot of people have heard a lot of this stuff over and over again, but it's up to you. I mean, some of these books I've had for absolute years. It's just finding them all, because I've got a big box, no, a couple of boxes filled with books, because I haven't got a bookcase anymore, because the cats kind of ruined it. So a lot of my books have been put in the loft and boxed up out of the way so they don't get destroyed, because some pretty expensive books as well, books that I've had for a very long time. Yes, very long time. Then I've got this book, but again, it's not really on stories, but it's just basically talking about the occult and the unexplained and the mystical around the world. I mean, that's another. But this one I've decided to read out of is, this is Poltergeists and Other Hauntings. So it's by somebody called Rupert Matthews. Like I said, I've got endless supplies of books. There's just so many, including a couple of that I've read from already. And I've got more. Right, this one I'm going to read, if this book lets me. I'll actually show you this book. It's actually pretty nifty. I don't remember paying 10 quid for it, but like I said, it was a long time ago. And yes, my hair's wet because I very rarely blow dry it, because it just makes it look like I'm Kate Bush or something. My hair just goes. So when I wash my hair, I kind of just leave it to dry. So unless I'm going out somewhere, then I just leave it. So this book, Poltergeists and Other Hauntings. You can see that. Look, me and my camera. So, pretty cool book. Yeah, we're lowering the mattress because it's just an absolute pain in the neck now, and we keep climbing up and down on this. It's actually hurting my legs, even if I'm sat with my legs crossed. And yeah, so this story is, if I can get this right, because it's quite a heavy book for somebody who has problems with the wrists. It's under the chapters of demons, and witches, and this is called The Cock Lane Ghost. And it says cases they've examined so far remains mysterious and unexplained, even though they were seen as the work of ghosts, witches, or demons in their time. However, a mysterious haunting that caught the public imagination in 1762 appears to have been satisfactorily explained in the same year. Hey, do you mind The train of events that led to the Cock Lane ghost as a visitation came to be known began in 1756 when William Kent married Elizabeth Lynes in Norfolk. The couple then moved to London. Get my hair off it. Bloody hair. This is why I tie it up a lot, but I won't have it short. Where are we? The couple then moved to London, but a year later, Elizabeth died in childbirth. Her sister, I hate some of these old names, Fanny, where is it? Moved to London to care for the baby and to act as a housekeeper for Kent. Sheesh, talk about slave labour. Yeah, her sister Fanny moved to London to care for the baby and to act as a housekeeper for Kent. The baby died of some unspecified illness a few months later. Not an uncommon occurrence at the time, but by this time Fanny and Kent had fallen in love. Dum dum dum. Says it all, really. The law did not permit them to marry at that time, but nothing could stop them setting up house together. They occupied the upper floors of a property in Cock Lane, which were rented from the man who lived on the floor, a man, Mr. Richard Parsons. Being short of cash, Parsons borrowed £20 from Kent. He agreed to pay the sum back at the rate of £1 each month. Good God, but them days, £1 was a lot of money. But by the autumn of 1761, Fanny was pregnant. So when Kent had to go away from London for a couple of weeks on business, she did not want to be left alone. Her solution was to invite her landlord's 11-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, to stay with her while Kent was away. I would have wanted to be on my own, but there you go. I suppose that's the disadvantage of having no TV, not many books, no internet, being on your own. But sometimes being on your own, yeah. Sheesh. One night, a strange noise was heard in the Kent apartment. At first, it sounded as if a large rat was scurrying about behind the wood panelling. But then it began to sound like human knuckles banging on the wood. It was rather odd. On the next night, the sounds came back, but this time they were louder and more intense. But by the time Kent returned from London, Fanny was in a state of great fear. I would be seeing his face when he came through the door. She had somehow become convinced that the noises were caused by a demon that had come to kill her. Sounds a bit sus. She's got a lot of bad issues going on. Kent could see no alternative but to move, so he took rooms in Bartlett Court, Clerkenwell. Before leaving, he asked Parsons for the return of his money. Parsons refused to pay him back. And then he taunted Kent with the fact that he was living with Fanny out of wedlock, which was very, very bad in them days. He threatened to write to Fanny's family in Norfolk and reveal what was going on. Kent consulted his lawyers and launched a legal action to get his money back. Meanwhile, the move to Clerkenwell proved to be disastrous. Within days, Fanny had contracted smallpox, and a few days later she was dead. So this Kent's not having very much luck, is he? Back in Cock Lane, the strange noises continued. The sounds migrated downstairs from the former Kent room to Elizabeth's bedroom. They were most noticeable at night when she was in bed, but they would start at all sorts of hours. However, it was soon noticed that they could only be heard when Elizabeth was in the house. That's no bloody good. She's dead now. Unless it's the little girl, Elizabeth. Because even though Fanny was dead, and I can't remember what the other lady was called, but bleeding heck. Unless Elizabeth's being naughty and she's the one that's doing it to scare everybody. Parsons began charging people to enter his house so that they could listen to the inexplainable noises. Need to put my teeth in again. Among those who came were Dr. Johnson, the Duke of York, Horace Walpole, and the Reverend Douglas, who was later to become Bishop of Salisbury. A woman named Mary Fraser was hired to be a sort of chaperone to young Elizabeth. Parsons was perhaps concerned by the fact that a number of strange men went in and out of her bedroom at night. That would mean not good. After a few weeks, the attraction of the odd noises began to wane and the visitors tailed off. Well, it's boring. Anybody can make noise. Perhaps in an effort to save her job, Fraser then hit upon the idea of allowing people to question the ghost. She suggested that the ghost should give one knock to mean yes and two knocks to mean no. But nowadays, it doesn't seem much has changed then, has it? If it chose not to answer or did not know the answer, it should make a scratching noise. The new system proved to be an enormous hit, and soon crowds of paying visitors were flocking to Cock Lane. Over the course of the autumn of 1761, the ghost gradually shared a harrowing story with the stream of visitors. It revealed that it was the spirit of the recently departed Fanny. It sounds a bit sus, doesn't it? Even though the noises had begun when Fanny was very much alive, quickly dubbed Scratching Fanny by the London crowd, the entity then began to discuss the details of Fanny's relationship with Kent. Most of these were satirists, but one stood claim out boldly. Do I have to say this next? Scratching Fanny keep your mind out of the gutter, declared that she had been murdered by Kent, who had daily dosed her with her drink with arsenic. She had not succumbed to smallpox after all. When the visitors asked what should be done about the claims, the ghost replied that Kent should hang. Yeah, I think he should. The inevitability news of the accusations reached Kent. He demanded that Parsons and Elizabeth retract the claims. They counteracted that the claims came from Fanny's ghost, not themselves. Kent was invited to Cock Lane so that he could question the spirit himself. After some debate about who should be in attendance at the event and how it should be conducted, Kent went to Elizabeth's bedroom in Cock Lane. At first, the ghost refused to make any noises. It had been growing noticeably quieter in the recent weeks, but after a while, the familiar knockings began. Kent examined the bedroom for signs of trickery, and then the Reverend John Moore began to question the spirit. After some preliminary queries, Moore got to the main business. "Are you Fanny Lanes?" he asked. There came one knock for yes. "Were you murdered by William Kent?" There was another single knock for yes. "Did anyone else assist Kent?" Two knocks indicated no. William Kent leapt to his feet. "Thou art a lying spirit," he shouted, and then he stormed out. He then went to see his lawyers, where he launched a prosecution against Parsons. Elizabeth, Fraser and more on the grounds of conspiracy to slander. The case progressed, and by June 1762 it came to court. The matter revolved around whether a disembodied spirit was making the accusations or whether Parsons was producing the noises. If the ghost episode was shown to be a hoax, it would prove that the accusations against Kent were false. Perhaps it was all an attempt to dissuade Kent from pursuing his case for the repayment of the £20. Well, over 20 quid. Sheesh. The court made 3 journeys to Elizabeth's bedroom. On each occasion, the court officials undertook a strict search to make sure there was no trickery was possible. On the first 2 visits, no noises were heard. The magistrate leading the investigation told Parsons that unless something happened on the 3rd visit, he would be found guilty. When the court made their final trip, the spirit repeated its story about the murder, but this time there was something different about the sounds. Elizabeth's bed was searched and a piece of wood was found. The girl had been rapping with the wood. Next day, the court found Kent, Parsons, Fraser and Moore were condemned to stand in the pillory. The news of Elizabeth's attempted trickery spread rapidly and made all the newspapers of the day. So far as 18th century London was concerned, the concept of ghosts had been thoroughly debunked. Other visitations still took place, but none of them were investigated properly, nor were the events recorded carefully. Educated men no longer took them seriously as a result. Some of the accounts that survive are sketchy and superficial, while others are solemnly concerned with disproving the notion of ghosts. But this is the next story. It's actually a very, very well-known one, if anybody knows of the Bell Ghost. The Bell Witch, sorry. So I'm wondering whether I should read it or not. I've heard it many, many times. But you know what? I'm going to carry it on. And then, because these are long stories, I don't want to bore people to death because they'll end up bloody falling off the chair or something. So we'll start with this one. It says, however, people in the United States remained rather more open to the idea of the supernatural. As a result, the visitation that affected the Bell family of Robertson County, Tennessee, had been recorded in much greater detail than would have been the case in England. The Bell family consisted of John Bell, his wife Lucy, and their 9 children. Again, this is how you can tell they had no TV. They lived in isolated wooden farmhouse some distance from anything that might be termed a town. 4 of the children, John the eldest, 12-year-old Elizabeth known as Betsy, 10-year-old Richard and 9-year-old Joel were affected more than the others. The visitation seemed to have begun in the early months of 1817, though the initial manifestations were so minor and sporadic that it was impossible to be certain. One night the family was disturbed by what sounded like rats or other small animals scuffling around the house. On occasion, the noises sounded more like a dog scrabbling at the front door. These animal sounds gradually escalated in intensity. By the autumn of 1817, the whole family were aware that something odd was going on, but nothing could be seen. They found that if they got up in the night to investigate the sounds, they could find nothing. If a lamp was lit, the noises ceased immediately. Sounds sus, doesn't it? No matter what steps were taken, no rats were ever found. It was a real puzzle, but at that stage, it was still not much of a problem. That changed in the spring of 1818, when loud thumps and bangs echoed through the farmhouse. Soon afterwards, a rather disturbing sound began to be heard. It was difficult to place at first, but the Bells soon decided that it sounded much like a person smacking his lips in anticipation. of a feast. Next came a sound that was more akin to somebody being throttled. It was most upsetting, but worse was to come. The first physical manifestation took place one night. The bedclothes were hauled off the beds in which the children slept. I would have bloody tied the buggers down. The bedding, that is. This happened on several consecutive nights. It woke the children and caused an understandable degree of fright and alarm. After a couple of weeks of restless nights, events escalated. Then Richard was woken up by someone pulling hard on his hair. His screams roused the household, which ensured another broken night's sleep. Then it was Joel's turn. Finally, the poltergeist turned on Betsy. Her hair was pulled night after night. It soon became clear that having found Betsy, the invisible intruder had found its target. Not only was her hair pulled repeatedly, but stones were thrown at her, even when she was indoors and nobody else was in the room. Then an invisible hand slapped her face. Damn, it's a shame you can't slap these ghosts back. Her brother was talking to her at the time, heard the slap and saw Betsy's cheek redden where the blow had fallen. This was too much for John Bell. He sent for a near neighbour named James Johnson, who knew his Bible rather better than most people did. It seemed that Johnson began by thinking that the children were playing some rather cruel tricks on their father. However, he could not make up his mind if Betsy was in on the prank or was a victim. When Johnson called at the Bell household, all was quiet for a while, but then came the familiar sound of smacking lips. Johnson swung round angrily. "Stop it!" "In the name of the Lord," he shouted. The sound stopped and nothing else happened during his visit. Damn, that's easy, isn't it? If that worked. The persecution of Betsy continued after Johnson had left. Johnson advised John Bell to arrange for a rota of neighbours to be in the house where they could keep an eye on things. On the children, in other words. Well, with 9, you bleeding need it, don't you? The stone throwing, the face slapping, and the knocks and bangs continued unabated. But at least there were witnesses from outside the family. When one visitor expressed the view that events were all some kind of children's trick, he was promptly slapped on the face by an invisible hand. The disturbances then moved outside the house. They began on the track that led to the local church and at the school. About 100 yards from the house, the track passed a dense thicket of trees and bushes. As the children walked past this thicket on their way to and from school, they would find themselves struck by a flying stick. Flying sticks. Broomstick? In common with the stones that had been thrown at Betsy, however, they either missed the children or only targeted them lightly if they hit their target. Young Joel took to throwing the sticks back, but they were returned with increased force. Seemed that something in the bushes was catching them. Using his pocket knife, children had such things then. Richard made a stick and threw it into the thicket. The marked stick came back, swishing back in an instant. There had to be somebody there. However, when the thicket was searched, there was no sign of life. Well, they've all buggered off, that's why. Back indoors, the team of neighbours had become so accustomed to the invisible intruder that they started to play games with it. When they began by tapping on the kitchen table, the intruder immediately responded with an identical number of raps. Young Richard later wrote that this behaviour had only made things worse. Well, it sounds like they were taunting it, so I'm not surprised. It had made the spirit seek attention, rather in the manner of a naughty child. Soon the familiar lip smacking and choking noises began to be accompanied by grunts, groans, whistles, and whispers. At first, the whispers could not be understood. They were too faint and indistinct. But within a few days, it was possible to discern words and phrases. One of the ghost's first utterings was, "I am the spirit who was once happy." Well, yeah, sounds like it was real pissed off. But I have been disturbed and I am now unhappy. The majority of the voice comments were altogether less pleasant and less informative. Many of them were unprintable, expressing views that few would air in public. John Bell refused to write down most of what the voice said on the grounds that it was blasphemous or on an explicitly sexual nature. The voice expressed its hatred of John Bell, whom it called Old Jack Bell, saying that it'd come to torment him. The threat was not idle, for the entity soon turned away from Betsy and focused its attention on John. In addition to the slapping and the stone throwing, John mysteriously contracted a lockjaw and a swollen tongue. Lockjaw, isn't that some sort of effect that you can get from an infection? That's why you tetanus, if I remember right. The threat was not idle, for the entity soon turned away from Betsy and focused the attention of John. In addition to the slapping and stone throwing, John mysteriously contracted a lockjaw and a swollen tongue. He could sometimes neither eat nor talk for days on end. John Bell was not the only member of the household to come in for harsh treatment. The family had a young slave called Anki, who helped Mrs. Bell out with the household tasks, such as the washing and the cleaning. The voice would sometimes follow Anki about the house, making comments that today would be classed as racist. The spirit also resorted to more controversial insults. On one occasion, the unfortunate girl found herself diluted with a liquid that looked like spit. Ew. When it was asked for more details of who or what it was, the voice at first replied that it was a Native American who had been buried on the site of the house. The visitation was a protest against the building of a white folks' farm on top of its bones, it said. It then discarded that explanation and declared that it was old Kate Batts' witch. Kate Batts was a local black woman who earned a modest living as a sort of doctor cum social worker to the black community. She acted as a midwife at births, laid out the dead ready for funerals, prepared herbal remedies for the sick, and lent a sympathetic ear to those with troubles. Kate Batts was called in for questioning, but she steadfastly denied having anything to do with the upheavals at the Bells household. Fortunately for her, she was believed. She was also denied using witchcraft of any type at all, but the voice's insistence that it was old Kate Batts' witch stuck in people's minds. Thereafter, the phenomenon came to be called the Bell Witch. Within a few weeks, the voice of the Bell Witch had been joined by others. A gruff man's voice declared that its name was Black Dog. A young boy's voice said it was Jerusalem, and a woman's voice claimed to be mathematics. The four voices took to singing broadly tavern songs and telling rude jokes, while the smell of whiskey filled the house. It was as if some loud drunken party was being enjoyed by the Bell Witch and its friends. The voices began to discuss local people with a frankness that was deeply embarrassing. Medical problems were talked about as well, as the sexual behaviour of married couples Then the voices began to make accusations of drunkenness, violence, and the theft, none of which could be either proved or disapproved. Needless to say, they caused understandably upset and the merriment in the community. The voices then took to repeating long passages from the local minister's Sunday sermon, mocking and joking all the way. One day the voice of the Bell Witch announced that it knew the location of a secret hoard of hidden gold. It then whispered the details to Betsy. The boys of the family took to shovels and spent hours digging at a specific spot, but then found nothing. When they got back, the Bell Witch broke out into loud laughter and teased the boys about their escapade for days. It had obviously enjoyed the joke. Sounds like it was taking the absolute piddle out of them. The Bell Witch enjoyed other unpleasant jokes too, such as placing pins in the beds or on chairs where people might be expected to prick themselves. The witch also developed a kind of fascination with shoes. They were moved about when nobody was looking, and they were wrenched off people's feet when they sat down. John Bell was the target of the majority of the incidents, and he also came in for the most unpleasant treatment. One attack was worse than the rest. He had just stepped out of the front door to begin work on the farm for the day when the Bell Witch grabbed his feet and would not let him walk. Suddenly he felt the invisible hands let go, but he was then punched so hard in the face that he staggered back and had to sit down on a log to recover. The Bell Witch then threw John off the log and shrieked with laughter as it jerked his arms and legs about. He had no means of controlling his convulsive movements. When the invisible entity finally let him go, it stayed in the vicinity, singing obscene and offensive songs. Richard had just joined his father, so he helped him back indoors, where he took to his bed for a couple of days. Aggressive as the Bell Witch was towards the father of the family, it could be surprisingly pleasant to the rest of the household. When Mrs. Bell was taken ill, the voice hung about weeping and lamenting, "Poor Lucy, oh poor Lucy." Then it made a couple of pounds of hazelnuts appear at the side of the sick bed. When Betsy saw the nuts, she commented, "Oh, but we have no nutcrackers." Instantly 2 pounds of shelled hazelnuts arrived. The sick woman did not fancy the nuts. They are not generally known as a suitable invalid food, so the Bell Witch came back with a large bunch of grapes, which fell from nowhere onto Mrs. Bell's bed. The voice said, "These will be good for her health," as the grapes landed. I've got a dead foot. That's my fault for sitting on them. On Betsy's birthday, the Bell Witch proved to be very generous. A large basket of fruit, including oranges, bananas, and grapes, materialized out of nowhere. "Those came from the West Indies," the witch announced. "I bought them myself." It sounded almost proud. In 1819, Betsy fell in love with a local farm boy named Joshua Gardner. But this time the disturbances had been going on for about 2 years. The romance blossomed and an engagement was thought to be imminent. Suddenly the Bell Witch seemed to become aware of the relationship. Not only that, it took a violent dislike to it. The voice of the Bell Witch began following Betsy around the house. It said things like, "Please, Betsy Bell, don't have Joshua Gardner," or "Don't marry Joshua Gardner." And then it tried insulting the harmless young man. When such pleading did not work, the voice tried a new tactic. When Betsy was out with Gardner, the Bell Witch would keep up a running commentary for the benefit of the rest of the Bell family. It repeated the conversation the two were having. It announced that they were kissing, and it described where Joshua put his hands and how Betsy reacted. When Betsy came home, the voice taunted her for her supposedly wanton ways. In the end, the pressure got too much and the couple broke up. Next day, one of Joshua's friends arrived at the Bell farm in a blazing temper. Frank Miles pushed his way into the house and shouted out, "Take any shape you desire, just so that I can get my hands on you." There followed a few seconds of silence before an invisible fist punched the young man extremely hard in the face and then in the stomach, causing him to double up in pain and gasp for breath. He left when he recovered from the beating. The activities of the Bell Witch were heading toward the climax that would ensure its Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? Yes, you. Leave it alone. Yes. Contemporary fame and make it one of the most startling cases in the history of poltergeist studies. Yes, you. Making so much noise. On the 18th of December 1820, John Bell announced that he was not feeling well and that he was going to bed early. Next day he did not wake up and he was found to be in a stupor. The voice of the bell gloated, "It's useless for you to try to relieve old Jack. I've got him this time. He will never get up from that bed again." After John Jr. had sent for the doctor, he noticed a small bottle that neither he nor anyone else recognised. The Bell Witch spoke out again. "I put it there, and I gave old Jack a dose last night while he was asleep, which fixed him." The father of the tormented family died the next day without regaining consciousness. On the day of the funeral, the witch moved around the house singing songs, one of which was then popular barroom ditty, "Roll me up some brandy, oh." The apparent murder of John Bell spread the fame of the Bell Witch far and wide. This single act had ensured that the case remains so famous today. No other poltergeist has ever been known to cause the death of a person or even inflict serious injury. But then the Bell Witch had punched and hit several different people before John Bell died. So it seemed to have been abnormal. After the funeral, the Bell Witch went relatively quiet. All of its unusual antics were performed, but everybody agreed that they were neither as spectacular nor as frequent as they'd been before. On one occasion, John Jr. asked the Bell Witch if it could help him to speak to the spirit of his dead father. The Bell Witch refused. "He is no longer of this world," it said, after explaining that any evidence of a person surviving death was fraudulent. It then instructed John Jr. to look out of the window. He did so and saw a set of footprints being made in the snow, as if an invisible man was approaching the house. The Bell Witch claimed that the prints were identical to those made by old Jack Bell. Make sure I've got this page right, because they're quite thick pages. In stones. Nope, I knew it. 2 pages stuck together. In his winter boots. Young John did not bother checking. He'd lost interest. A few weeks later, the Bell family were at supper when a loud crashing and rumbling noise came from the chimney. What looked like a large cannonball thumped into the fireplace. It then rolled into the room and exploded in a cloud of choking smoke. The voice of the Bell Witch boomed out, "I am going and will be gone for 7 years." The smoke cleared and the Bell Witch had gone. 7 years later, it was back. By this time, only Mrs. Lucy Bell and her 2 youngest children were living in the farmhouse. The other children had married and moved away. The manifestations began as before, with the sounds of invisible animals scratching about. On a couple of nights, bedclothes were torn off again. Mrs. Bell and her children decided to ignore anything that happened. They did not even discuss the Bell Witch in the house. After a few days, the manifestations ceased. John Jr. claimed that when the disturbances ceased for the second time, he heard a voice of the Bell Witch say that it was leaving for 107 years. By that reckoning, it should have been back in 1935. But there is no record of it reappearing. Looking back on these early cases, it is clear that they contain many of the features that are now associated with poltergeist visitations. But I'm not going into more stories because it all just carries on and on and on and on. It's quite a big book, but it's quite fascinating. It's actually quite a good book. It's an easier read. Some of them, they just bring out jargon that just doesn't need to be said. But yeah. Damn, I'm knackered now. But yeah, I do actually enjoy my books. Just sometimes I have problems reading when I end up having a fluffy one come and sit on me. Because that happens. I'll be sat there and a fluffy one will come and sit on me and I'll be like, can't see, cat in the way. Cats are not transparent. So you make a better door than a window. Anyway, next week I'm thinking of doing a live. And then the week after should be the video up from Screamfest. But we'll see how it all goes and how it all progresses this weekend. And I'm not absolutely shattered. Because things are a bit different. Because I'm a bit more, yeah, not easy on my feet. So we'll just see how it goes. Hopefully it'll be a good one. It should do. Because it's great meeting up with some people that I already know and meeting up with people that I don't know so well. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Bye. Okay. So that clock.